It was supposed to be the happiest day of my brother's life. A day meant for joy, for new beginnings, and for celebration. But instead, it turned into the day everything I thought I knew about my family came crashing down. I'll never forget the moment my father looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't welcome at the wedding. "You're ruining the mood," he said, as if his words could erase everything I'd ever been. I stood there in shock, my heart racing, and tried to process it. My own father banning me from my brother's wedding? The one event we were supposed to be united for? But I didn't argue. I simply walked out of the room. As I stepped outside, though, something in me snapped. I knew why he didn't want me there. It wasn't about me ruining the mood. It was about the secret I had kept buried for far too long. You see, the truth about our family was far worse than anyone could imagine. My father had been hiding something for years, something that could tear our whole family apart. That cabin my brother was so eager to inherit? It wasn't my father's to give. I knew the truth, but I had kept it locked inside, thinking that maybe it wasn't my place to expose it. But in that moment, standing outside the wedding, I realized it was time. It was time to stop hiding. I turned around, walked back into that room, and grabbed the microphone. Every eye in the room turned toward me. My father's face turned pale as I began to speak. "There's something you need to know," I said, and for the first time in my life I was going to reveal everything. Everything my father had worked so hard to keep hidden. Growing up, my father wasn't the kind of man you could easily approach. He was the silent type, stern, distant, and always so focused on the bigger picture that he never really made space for us, his family. I remember the few times he would sit down with me, but it felt more like a business meeting than a father-daughter talk. I never felt the warmth you'd expect from a parent. Instead, I was always left with questions. Why didn't he love me the way other dads seemed to love their kids? Why was he so hard to read? With my brother, things were a bit different. They had this unspoken connection, something I could never fully understand. Maybe it was because they were both men. Or maybe it was because my brother, from a young age, seemed to understand how to navigate my father's world. I never quite got the hang of it. I tried to make my father proud, I really did. But it always felt like my achievements didn't matter, not in the way they mattered for my brother. Over the years, I tried to convince myself that I was okay with the distance between us. I tried to believe that it was just how things were supposed to be. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My father wasn't like other dads, and I wasn't like other kids. There were times, especially during holidays or family gatherings, when I would sit back and watch my father laugh with my brother, exchange stories, and share inside jokes. And there I was, always on the outside, feeling like I was missing something. As time passed, that distance between us only seemed to grow. It wasn't just the lack of connection. It was the subtle tension. The things my father said, the way he looked at me, the way he'd ignore me when I spoke. It all built up slowly until I started to wonder if I had somehow failed him, if I had done something wrong to make him so cold. When I reached my 20s and started living on my own, I tried to put some distance between myself and the constant ache of wanting my father's approval. I moved out, started working, and even met someone special. I thought maybe it was just me, maybe I had been too sensitive all these years. But the silence from my father didn't stop. If anything, it grew worse. And every time I tried to reach out, there was nothing but indifference on the other end. It wasn't that he hated me, it was worse. He simply didn't seem to care. It was around this time that I started to realize how much I longed for my father's attention. I had tried so hard for years to fit into his world, to be the daughter he wanted me to be. But no matter how much I tried, it was like there was an invisible wall between us that I couldn't break down. And then my brother got engaged. The wedding planning began, and with it, the perfect opportunity for things to change. Or so I thought. I kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, this would be the time my father would look at me and say, "I'm proud of you," or, "You matter to me." I hoped the wedding would bring us together. But as the date drew closer, something inside me began to feel uneasy. There was tension in the air, a strange sort of distance that I couldn't explain. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was something deeper, something older that had been brewing for years. Little did I know that day, that wedding day, would be the day everything changed. And not in the way I expected. The moment my father spoke those words, everything inside me froze. "You're not welcome here," he said, his voice cold, as he stood in front of the guest list with my brother by his side. "Leave. You're ruining the mood." I stood there, stunned, unable to even find my voice. My own father, the man I had spent my entire life trying to win over, had just thrown me out of my brother's wedding without even blinking. He didn't raise his voice, didn't give me a reason. It was as if, in his mind, my presence was nothing more than an inconvenience. I tried to process it, tried to convince myself it wasn't happening, that maybe I misunderstood. But I didn't. I could see it in his eyes. There was no warmth, no care, just a cold, dismissive stare that told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't wanted. I wasn't needed. I was nothing to him. The pain hit me in waves. I felt a knot tighten in my chest, my stomach turning with a mix of confusion, betrayal, and hurt. My father, the one man who was supposed to protect me, had just kicked me out of a day that was supposed to be about family. He'd just erased me from this moment in my brother's life like I didn't matter. I didn't argue. What was the point? What could I say that would make a difference? Instead, I quietly turned away and walked out. My legs felt like they were made of stone as I left the reception hall behind, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. But as I stepped outside, the hurt turned into something else: anger. It burned in my chest like a fire, growing hotter with each passing second. How could he do this to me? How could he erase me so easily from my own family's life? All those years of trying to please him, trying to prove I was worth something to him. For what? To be tossed aside in front of everyone like I was nothing? As I stood there in the parking lot, I realized something else. This wasn't just about the wedding. It wasn't even about me. It was about control. My father had always been the one to control everything in our family, his rules, his decisions, his narrative. And now, with a single sentence, he was reminding me that my place in this family was whatever he decided it to be. The worst part: the look on my brother's face. He didn't say anything, didn't come to my defense. He just stood there, almost as if he didn't know how to handle the situation. It was like he had been taught, just like I had, to accept my father's decisions without question. I couldn't blame him. He had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And now, at this wedding, he was playing the part perfectly, standing by our father's side, watching as I was cast aside. It was as if, in that moment, I didn't even exist. But the anger that was bubbling inside me wasn't just about being excluded. It was about everything that had built up over the years. The years of silence. The years of trying to fit into a family that didn't understand me. The years of my father's control over every part of my life, including my place in it. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't walk away head down, feeling small and worthless like I always had. Something had to change. It was time for the truth to come out. The lies, the manipulation, the control, it all needed to be exposed. I wasn't going to stay silent any longer. I took a deep breath and turned back toward the reception. My heart pounded as I made my way to the microphone. I had no idea what I was going to say, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't leaving that room without telling everyone what my father had done. The truth was about to come out, whether he liked it or not. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. No one was meant to know. But then again, there were always those little moments, those cracks in the walls, when I felt like I was on the verge of something, a truth that had been hidden for so long that even I, in all my years of wondering, never could have imagined it. I was only 18 when I first stumbled upon the secret. It wasn't something anyone intended to tell me, not even my mother. But you can only keep a secret for so long before it starts to seep through the cracks. I was home from college for the summer. I had a little more freedom, a little more curiosity. One evening, my father had gone out for one of his usual business meetings. The ones he claimed were so important, but I never quite understood. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through some old family papers. I was just about to ask her about something, but then I saw it. An old letter, faded with age, tucked between two folders. The name on the envelope wasn't one I recognized. I tried to look away to not get involved, but curiosity always wins. I opened it before I even realized what I was doing. The letter inside was dated over 30 years ago, and the contents made my heart stop. It was from a woman I had never heard of. The tone was respectful, even kind, but the message was clear. She was trying to reach my father about something important, something about a property, a cabin in the mountains. And then, right at the end, the words that struck me like a punch to the gut: "Your son deserves to know the truth." It was like a lightning bolt. I was stunned, holding this letter in my hands, my mind racing. What son? I whispered, my thoughts spinning. My father's son? But I had a brother. So who was this about? I could feel the room closing in on me, my heartbeat thundering in my chest. There was no way to ignore this now. Something was horribly wrong. I folded the letter back carefully, unsure of what to do. I should have told my mother. I should have confronted my father. But I didn't. I didn't even know where to begin. The days that followed were filled with an overwhelming sense of confusion. I tried to ask my mother, but her face went pale as soon as I brought up the letter. She dismissed it quickly, telling me it was from someone who didn't matter, someone who had no place in our lives. But there was something in her eyes, something that told me there was more to the story. I tried to forget about it, but the letter haunted me. I began to ask around, small questions, casual ones, just to get a sense of what was really going on. And every time my father shut me down like he could see right through me. His indifference wasn't just cold, it was dangerous. I had touched on something I wasn't meant to know, something he didn't want me to know. But one night, a few months later, when I was home for winter break, the truth came crashing down. I was in the living room looking through some old family photos, when I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but I could make out enough to understand. "We can't keep lying to her," my mother said, her voice shaky. "She has to know about him. It's time." "You know why I've kept this from her," my father replied, his tone hard. "She's better off not knowing." I held my breath, frozen in place. It was then that I understood. The secret wasn't just about some random property or a distant relative. It was about a man. A man who wasn't me, but who had been very much a part of my father's life. It wasn't until later that night, when I finally confronted my father, that the truth began to unfold piece by piece. He sat me down, his face grim, and started telling me a story I never could have imagined. The man in the letter was my father's brother, someone I had never been told about. A brother who had died in a car accident long before I was born. The cabin, the one that was supposedly a family property, wasn't really my father's at all. It had been my uncle's, and my father had taken control of it after his death, pretending it was his. But the real shock came when I learned that my uncle had left a portion of the property to a child he had with a woman who had never been married to him. My brother, the one I grew up with. I couldn't believe it. My brother wasn't my father's only child, not by a long shot. In fact, the truth was worse than I'd imagined. My brother was the child of my father's brother. His biological son. I had been living a lie my whole life, and what was worse, my father had kept it from me, even from my brother, for years. I sat there, paralyzed by disbelief. The weight of what my father had done, the betrayal of keeping such a massive secret. It was too much. My family wasn't just a little broken. It was fractured beyond repair. And I realized in that moment that everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, had been built on lies. I wasn't just angry. I was devastated. That was the moment when I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The secret my father had kept from us wasn't just about a piece of property. It was about our entire family, our history, our relationships, and the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. The weight of the decision was suffocating. My hands trembled as I stared at the microphone, hearing the soft hum of the wedding guests in the background, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. In that moment, every part of me screamed to walk away, to leave it all behind and fade into the shadows where I had always been. But something in me, something that had been buried deep down for years, was telling me that this time I couldn't be silent. I couldn't let it go. For days I had fought with myself, torn between two impossible choices. On one hand, there was the truth, the ugly, destructive truth that had haunted me for years. If I told everyone what I knew, everything would change. My brother's wedding, this beautiful day meant to unite our family, would become a battleground. Our family, already fragile, would shatter. It would never be the same again. My father's control, his lies, the secrets, all of it would be exposed for the world to see. The betrayal that had been hidden for so long would come pouring out, and there would be no going back. On the other hand, if I stayed silent, I would be complicit in the lie. I would continue to stand by, to allow the family to pretend that everything was fine, that nothing had ever happened. The secret would remain buried, and life would go on as if nothing had changed. But how could I live with that? How could I keep quiet when I knew the truth? My own brother didn't even know who he really was, and neither did I. And my father, he would never change. He would continue to manipulate, to control, to hide behind his perfect facade. The thought of standing in front of everyone, tearing apart the carefully crafted lies, was terrifying. I could already see the looks on their faces. My father's anger, my brother's confusion, my mother's shame. But then I thought about what my silence meant. It meant letting my father's actions go unchallenged, It meant letting my brother continue to live in a lie, and it meant letting the cycle of deception carry on. But could I really be the one to destroy my brother's special day? Was it worth it? The wedding, the happiest day of his life, was about to be overshadowed by a truth that would tear our family apart. And what would happen after that? My father was powerful, his influence ran deep. He would try to spin the story to make it all my fault, to paint me as the villain. I could already hear the accusations. Why did you have to ruin everything? Why couldn't you just let it go? Yet, in the pit of my stomach, something kept telling me I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let the lies continue. The truth was ugly, it was painful, but it was real. And as much as I feared what would happen after I revealed it, I feared living in the shadow of those lies even more. The consequences of silence were too great. I had spent my entire life trying to gain my father's approval, trying to fit into a family that never truly accepted me for who I was. But now I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my brother, and it was about the family that had been built on a foundation of secrecy and manipulation. The anxiety gnawed at me. I could already imagine the fallout. My father would never forgive me. My brother, he would be caught in the middle, lost and confused. My mother, I knew she would break. She had always been a passive participant in my father's game, quietly enabling his behavior, but this would shatter her too. She couldn't hide from this truth. And yet, in the depths of my confusion, I could hear my conscience louder than ever. You can't keep letting them control your life. I had lived in silence for far too long. I had sacrificed my own truth for the sake of keeping the peace, for the sake of protecting everyone else's feelings. But that wasn't living, it was existing. And in that moment I realized that it wasn't just my family that needed the truth. It was me. With my heart pounding in my chest, I knew what I had to do. The decision wasn't about being right or wrong. It wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about standing up for the truth. About finally choosing my own path, even if it meant risking everything. I wasn't going to let this secret fester anymore. It was time for my family to face the truth, whether they were ready for it or not. I took a deep breath, walked up to the microphone and looked out at the crowd, feeling the weight of my decision. There was no turning back. The truth was coming. The question was, could I live with the consequences? The air in the room had shifted. It was electric with anticipation, the sound of laughter and conversation slowly fading as I walked toward the microphone. My heart raced in my chest, each beat pounding against my ribs as if my body was urging me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had come this far and there was no turning back now. As I stood there, microphone in hand, the weight of the moment hit me. This wasn't just about me. It was about all the years I had spent hiding, about the secret that had been poisoning my family for far too long. I glanced around the room. My father stood at the front, looking so proud, so sure of himself. His face was the picture of perfection, of control. My brother was beside him, glowing with happiness, unaware that his world was about to come crashing down. The guests, all smiles and laughter, had no idea what was about to unfold. To them, this was just another beautiful wedding, another joyous occasion in a life full of perfect moments. But in my chest, there was nothing but a storm, rage, fear, and a deep, overwhelming need to expose the truth. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. My father's eyes locked with mine from across the room, his gaze narrowing as if he could sense what was about to happen. The tension was palpable. I could almost feel him trying to communicate with me silently, pleading with me to stay silent, to leave things as they were. But this wasn't his decision anymore. The years of manipulation, of lies, of gaslighting, everything had built up to this moment. I cleared my throat, my voice trembling slightly as I spoke, but I pressed on. I know you've all come here to celebrate, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. But there's something I need to say, something that can't be ignored any longer. I could see the confusion in the faces around me. The guests exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what was happening. My father's jaw clenched. My brother, who had been talking to a guest near the front, froze. He looked at me, eyebrows furrowed, trying to process what was going on. My heart skipped a beat. He didn't know. He didn't know any of it. But I wasn't going to stop. For years, I continued, my voice growing steadier, there's been a secret in our family. A secret that no one has been brave enough to confront. And it's time you all knew the truth. I glanced at my father. His face was pale now, the mask of calm shattered. The sweat was beading on his forehead. I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that his perfect little world was crumbling in front of him. But it was too late. He had silenced me for too long. Now it was my turn to speak. "He's been hiding something from all of us," I said, my voice rising with each word. "A lie, a betrayal. And it's about the cabin that's been in our family for generations." Gasps echoed through the room. Guests turned to each other, whispering, some clearly unsure of what I was talking about. My father's hand shot out, his eyes wide, desperately signaling for me to stop. But I couldn't. "For years," I continued, "he's made us believe that everything was fine. That he had every right to keep us in the dark, to erase the truth. But here's the truth: he sold that cabin years ago without telling anyone. He kept the money. And he lied to all of us." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the collective breath of the room being held, a sense of disbelief spreading like wildfire. My father's face twisted in anger, his eyes flashing with fury. But I couldn't stop now. I had to finish this. "He told us stories about how the cabin was too expensive to maintain. He said it was better off sold. But the truth is he took the money and hid it. For years he let us believe he was just making decisions for the family when really he was making them for himself." My brother stood up slowly, his face pale, his eyes searching mine as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Dad would never." But I cut him off. "He would never. You don't know him like I do. You've been blinded by his charm, his lies. He's been controlling all of us, and I've had enough." The room erupted into chaos. Guests began murmuring, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others looking at my father for answers. My father stood frozen for a moment, his face contorted with rage. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he stormed toward me, his hand outstretched, as if he could physically stop me from continuing. "You don't know what you're talking about," he spat. "You don't understand anything. You've ruined everything. This isn't the time for this." But I didn't back down. I stood tall, facing him with every ounce of courage I had left. "It's never the right time, is it? You always have an excuse to keep the truth buried. But not anymore." The guests were in turmoil now. Some were leaving, others were standing frozen, unsure of what to do. My father's face had turned a deep shade of red, and I could see the veins bulging in his neck as he fought to regain control. But the damage had been done. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. In that moment, as I stood there in the midst of the chaos I had caused, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't relief, not yet. It wasn't happiness or satisfaction. But it was something close. The weight that had been crushing me for so long, the weight of silence, of secrets, was finally lifting. And for the first time in my life I felt free. Free from the lies, free from the control, and free to speak the truth no matter the cost. "He's been hiding something from all of us," I said, my voice rising with each word. "A lie, a betrayal. And it's about the cabin that's been in our family for generations." Gasps echoed through the room. Guests turned to each other, whispering, some clearly unsure of what I was talking about. My father's hand shot out, his eyes wide, desperately signaling for me to stop. But I couldn't. "For years," I continued, "he's made us believe that everything was fine. That he had every right to keep us in the dark, to erase the truth. But here's the truth: he sold that cabin years ago without telling anyone. He kept the money. And he lied to all of us." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the collective breath of the room being held, a sense of disbelief spreading like wildfire. My father's face twisted in anger, his eyes flashing with fury. But I couldn't stop now. I had to finish this. "He told us stories about how the cabin was too expensive to maintain. He said it was better off sold. But the truth is he took the money and hid it. For years he let us believe he was just making decisions for the family when really he was making them for himself." My brother stood up slowly, his face pale, his eyes searching mine as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Dad would never." But I cut him off. "He would never. You don't know him like I do. You've been blinded by his charm, his lies. He's been controlling all of us, and I've had enough." The room erupted into chaos. Guests began murmuring, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others looking at my father for answers. My father stood frozen for a moment, his face contorted with rage. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he stormed toward me, his hand outstretched, as if he could physically stop me from continuing. "You don't know what you're talking about," he spat. "You don't understand anything. You've ruined everything. This isn't the time for this." But I didn't back down. I stood tall, facing him with every ounce of courage I had left. "It's never the right time, is it? You always have an excuse to keep the truth buried." But not anymore. The guests were in turmoil now. Some were leaving, others were standing frozen, unsure of what to do. My father's face had turned a deep shade of red, and I could see the veins bulging in his neck as he fought to regain control. But the damage had been done. The truth was out and there was no taking it back. In that moment, as I stood there in the midst of the chaos I had caused, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't relief, not yet. It wasn't happiness or satisfaction. But it was something close. The weight that had been crushing me for so long, the weight of silence, of secrets, was finally lifting. And for the first time in my life I felt free. Free from the lies, free from the control, and free to speak the truth no matter the cost. The wedding was a disaster. Guests slowly began to leave, some of them offering awkward glances toward my father, others too uncomfortable to even make eye contact with me. The festive atmosphere that had filled the room just moments before had dissipated, leaving behind a strange, uncomfortable silence. My brother retreated into a corner, his back to the room, his eyes glazed over as he processed everything that had just happened. I could hear the murmurs of the remaining guests, their voices low and hushed as they tried to make sense of what had just unfolded. But no one seemed to know what to say. They had all been caught in the middle of a family drama they never expected. Some seemed to pity me, others appeared to take my father's side, but none of them knew the full story. No one knew the pain I had carried for years, or the desperation that had led me to make that fateful decision. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had irrevocably changed the course of my family's history. My father would never forgive me for this. He had already made that clear in his eyes. My brother, too, would carry the weight of this moment for a long time. The wedding, meant to be the happiest day of his life, had been forever marred by my need to speak the truth. I went home that night feeling as if a part of me had died. I had hoped for some form of relief after exposing the secret, but instead I felt a deep sense of loss. I had gained nothing. In my quest for justice, I had lost my place in the family. And the worst part was, I didn't know if I could ever get it back. In the days that followed, the family dynamic shifted permanently. My father refused to speak to me, his calls unanswered, his presence a cold shadow whenever I entered the room. My brother, though not as outwardly hostile, kept his distance. The conversations we used to have, those late-night talks where we shared our dreams and fears, were now replaced with awkward silences and forced pleasantries. I tried to reach out to him to explain why I had done what I did, but every time I picked up the phone I hesitated. I knew the damage had been done. There was no undoing it. And in some ways I think I was afraid that if I tried to fix things I would only make them worse. What had started as a desperate attempt to free myself from the burden of silence had left me with nothing but regret. I had wanted justice, but in its pursuit I had broken everything. It was a heavy price to pay for the truth. As the weeks went by, I found myself reflecting on the consequences of that one act. I had always believed that honesty was the best policy, that the truth would set me free. But now, standing in the ruins of my family, I wondered if I had been wrong all along. What price was I willing to pay for the truth? And was it worth it? In the end, I realized that while the truth might set you free, it doesn't always come without consequences. Some wounds, once opened, can never be healed. And sometimes the truth does more harm than good. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has happened, I've come to realize that some things in life can't be undone, no matter how much we wish we could turn back time. The truth I revealed at my brother's wedding was a bombshell that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. But in the aftermath, I've learned that sometimes you have to break everything down in order to rebuild it, even if it means losing pieces along the way. It's hard to put into words the depth of the transformation I've gone through since that day. My relationships with my father and brother are irreparably changed, and it feels like a part of me is missing too. But the more I think about it, the more I understand that family isn't about keeping secrets or pretending everything is fine for the sake of appearances. It's about trust, honesty, and understanding each other, flaws and all. I realized that for years I had been trapped in a lie, an unspoken agreement that silence would keep the peace. But silence doesn't protect anyone. It suffocates, builds resentment, and turns love into something distant and hollow. I thought exposing the truth would give me freedom, a sense of release. Instead, it led me to the painful realization that some truths are too heavy to bear, especially when they involve the people you love most. My father and I may never be able to rebuild the trust we once had. I don't know if he'll ever be able to look at me the same way again. But what I've come to understand is that this is his burden to bear, not mine. I did what I felt was right, and while it may have broken the family, it also opened my eyes to the importance of being true to myself, even when it's difficult. As for my brother, I don't know what the future holds. The wounds are still fresh, and I understand why he feels betrayed. I can only hope that in time he'll see that I never wanted to hurt him. The secret I exposed wasn't just my father's. It was a shared weight we all carried, one that none of us knew how to lift. Maybe someday he'll understand that I did it because I wanted us to heal, to stop living in the shadows of lies. Looking back, I now see that there's power in speaking the truth, but also consequences. Sometimes the price of honesty is higher than we're prepared to pay. But in the end, it's better to live with the truth than to suffocate in silence. I've learned that forgiveness isn't just about making peace with others. It's about making peace with yourself. And though the road ahead with my family may be long and uncertain, I've found peace within myself. I can't undo what's been done, but I can choose to move forward with integrity. I can choose to honor the lessons I've learned, the importance of honesty, the value of trust, and the courage it takes to speak up when it matters most. In a way, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that someday my family will heal from this, that my brother will understand, and that my father will find forgiveness in his heart, not for me but for himself. And maybe, just maybe, we can start to rebuild something stronger than the fragile illusion we once called family. It may take time, but I believe that the truth, no matter how painful, can be the beginning of a new chapter.